Hey guys, my name is Naguura, and today I'm going to be talking about the tier sets in 9.2, how they're going to be acquired, and some problems that might be caused with the acquisition of the tier set. So we recently saw a blue post where they basically changed the way tier sets are going to be acquired in 9.2. They are going to be tokens, which basically means that you kill a boss, a token drops. We do know that they drop from specific bosses in the raid, and we also know that there's only gonna be 3 bosses in the first week that drop tokens. So the first week we know the last 3 bosses are not available yet. You can only kill the bosses up until Anduin. So that means up until Anduin there's only 3 bosses that drop token. So in theory you're not able to get 4 set immediately in the first week. But the vault also drops tokens from all 9 slots. So you can get tokens from all 3 rating slots, from all 3 Mythic Plus slots, and additionally also from PvP. The tokens don't actually drop from Mythic Plus like end of dungeon chest, and they also don't drop, or you cannot buy them through PvP currency. They're only through the vault in those 2 areas of the game. The only area of the game that actually drops the tokens is the raid. Then, we do know that on Mythic, there's supposed to be 2 tier tokens that drop and 2 non-tier tokens per boss that drop tier sets, right? They changed this because on PTR, the way it used to be before they actually had the tokens was that there was the normal boss loot, and then additionally there was the tier tokens that dropped. But they changed this now to have only 2 tokens plus the 2 non-tier token items. Then we know there's a catch-up mechanic, also known as the creation catalyst. This one will be available from the 8th week onwards, so 8 weeks after the patch gets released. Now we know that Mythic comes out 3 weeks into the patch, so the second week we get normal and heroic, and in the third week we get Mythic. So that means that basically 6 weeks after the raid is there, fully unlocked, we can get those catch-up tokens through the catalyst. In case you don't know how the catalyst works, basically it's a catalyst in Zereth Mortis. There's a currency called Cosmic Flux. Now some people are saying, oh, currencies, no, so many currencies, everything is a currency. And it is true, there's a lot of currencies. But this currency is actually really good because it's very similar to echoes in BFA. They drop from any content you do. So basically from, as far as I'm aware, they drop from like M+, from raids, from everything you do, and also from things you do in Zereth Mortis as well. And this is not supposed to be a currency that you're specifically like hoard or look for. It's just supposed to be like you're getting it while you're doing things, basically. And then you can use this currency to craft tier sets. You can also use the same currency to craft your legendaries as well. And the way the tier sets are crafted is you go to this catalyst, you take an item from M+, from PvP or from the raid, and you turn it into a tier set. That's all we know. We don't know more specifics, like we don't know if the item level of the tier set is set to like normal mode, heroic, and mythic raid item level, and then it like scales up or down. It could also be like an in-between item level depending on which item you brought to the catalyst. Like maybe if you got an A+ item from the vault that is max item level and you brought it into the catalyst, maybe it becomes that item level or maybe not. We don't know exactly how it works. But that is the idea. And the stats are also turning into the tier stats. So if your shoulder piece has crit and mastery and you're bringing a shoulder piece that has haste and versatility, it's going to turn into crit and mastery because every tier token has the same stats, or every tier item has the same stats. All right, so that is what we know so far. Keep in mind, things can change still because they recently just changed it again. So all of this can change. Now, let's talk about the acquisition issue. So first of all, there is spec-specific borrowed power now. Of course, tier stat is borrowed power, but it is a spec-specific borrowed power. So that means that it's not the same for everyone, right? Every spec has a different 2 set, a different 4 set. Personally, I love spec-specific borrowed power. A lot of people say that they hate borrowed power as a whole, and I think it's a little bit too generalized because I know there's issues with borrowed power, especially because we have so much of it recently. But I do think the bigger issue with borrowed power is that if it's boring, right? Like if the borrowed power is actually like a boring power, then it's bad because there's so many of it and you feel like, oh my god, I need this and I need to farm that, I need to get this shard of domination and I need to get this renown thing and whatever, right? But as I said, I think usually the problem is that this borrowed power is more generic and boring, while if it's spec specific and you can actually play around it and you can feel this borrowed power and it changes the way you play and it has an impact on your spec, then I do think it feels much better. And that's why I'm a big fan of tier sets in this case, and I'm also a big fan of the legendaries as well that we're going to be getting, that second legendary, the Covenant legendary, because again, it is actually changing the way you play and it's impacting you. It's not necessarily completely spec specific because it's more like class specific, but it's still more impactful than like a super generic borrowed power would be. Now, I have been advocating for this for like a long time, and I wanted them to introduce more spec-specific borrowed power, so it feels weird that I'm complaining about this now, but the specific problem with 9.2 is that we not only get one borrowed power that is really, really powerful, because tier sets are up to like a 20% damage increase for certain classes, but we additionally also get that second legendary, which is also really powerful for some specs, right? So it's this huge power increase that we're getting through these two different borrowed power systems that can cause some problems with lots of things, with the DPS balancing during the acquisition. So of course, when you have when every single player has the 4 set already and has the set legendary already and everything is already acquired, then maybe those problems could be tuned properly. The problem lies in the progression. So when you're progressing through the raids, you're not immediately gonna have the 4 set, you're not immediately gonna have this legendary, and while you're progressing, this might cause some really weird power spikes and power differences between players because of the difference in acquisition, right? Some people get their 2 set maybe the first week already, and another person gets it the 3rd week, and then the 4 set is gonna be like a month for someone, and for the other player it's gonna be like 3 weeks or maybe 2 months, who knows, right? So the difference between these power spikes while acquiring this gear might cause some problems. We had a very similar problem with domination shards in Sanctum of Domination, where some players just did not get a full completed shard set while other players did, and it was this huge power difference between those players, and it was very noticeable and very not fun for the players who didn't have the set earlier, right? So that's a problem. And then additionally, because this is a spec specific power, is that some specs have a lot of their power in, like, let's say the second legendary, while other specs get most of their power through the 2 set, and other specs get most of their power through the 4 set, right? So there's always a difference in power gains between the specs. So let's say, just as an example, let's say Outlaw Rogue would only get like a 1% damage increase from the 2 set, while Fire Mage gets like 10% from the 2 set. So when both of these specs have 2 set, Fire Mage will be a lot stronger because they get a lot more power through the 2 set, while maybe Outlaw Rogues get a lot more power through the 4 set. But while this is happening, while you're progressing, it will be this big difference that can be weird, especially for balancing, for DPS balancing, right? The number differences between the specs. Now, that is definitely a problem for sure, but I do think that it's not as big of a problem because we have had this in the past, right? We've had tier sets in the past, and we had this exact same issue in the past where some people had the 2 set, some people had the 4 set, and some people had nothing, and it just always kind of was like this whenever there was a borrowed power that gave you such a huge power spike. The specific problem this time around is that I do think these borrowed powers, like the set and the legendary, are much bigger power gains than what we have known in the past. But yeah, that is something that they can still fix in theory. And even if they don't fix it, it's going to be a problem for like maybe a few weeks. And then afterwards, once everyone has this borrowed power, it's not going to be a problem anymore. So I do think they maybe are just going to be like, whatever. So during the acquisition, it's going to be a bit imbalanced. And then afterwards, it's going to be fine. And yeah, it might be a problem, but at the same time, it's going to be over soon, hopefully. But now let's talk about the bigger problem that I think can cause some issues, and I just want to clarify some things for players because people have been complaining about this a lot. So there has been like a leak of information, basically, where a developer has said that the tokens are not supposed to be tradable. So when the tokens drop, you're not supposed to be able to trade them unless you already have that token, right? Now, there's been a lot of outrage about this because what people assumed or the way people assumed it would work is just like how personal loot works in general, right? Personal loot works like this. If I have a shoulder piece that is item level 252 and I get a shoulder piece that is 252 or lower, then I can trade it. But apparently the tier sets this is not announced officially yet, and it also might still change. What they intend at the moment to do is that the tier token should not be tradable, even if you have a same or higher item level piece. If it's a non-set piece, then you won't be able to trade it, right? So they're intending that if you get your shoulder token and you haven't looted a shoulder token before, then you're not able to trade it no matter how high your shoulder piece is. Now, some people have been complaining about this a lot, and other people said it's whatever, and there's like all of these different kinds of opinions about this. And I do want to go into this problem, but I think the reason why they're considering this, for this not to be tradable, is like a much bigger problem that I want to explain first. So let's go back a bit and look at the bigger picture, and maybe also look at the history of how gear acquisition worked and how World First rating versus like normal guild rating works. In the past, we had master loot, right? Master loot means that you can, like, the boss drops loot and you can assign the loot to any person you want, right? This has been something that guilds have been doing by default, right? Because they wanted to assign their loot. It makes sense, right? They want to give loot to like the DPS players over tanks and healers. They want to give their loot to like maybe players there that are in on every boss instead of players who are like getting changed back and forth and so on. The reason why master loot has become a problem, and I also think a big reason why master loot has been removed, is because of the top guilds. Now, let me explain why I think this is why they removed it. Now, a lot of people have been saying that they did it for like the top 1% to stop split rating. And I actually don't think this is true. I think they removed it because of tuning, because of boss tuning. Because when master loot was a thing, what top guilds did was split rating, right? Now, I know they're still doing that, but the way split rating works is that you just do a bunch of raids. Like, let's say you do 6 raids instead of 1 on heroic, right? So you do 6 heroic raids instead of 1, and you split your main characters into those different raids, and then you funnel the gear onto your main characters, and you fill the rest of the raid with your alt characters, right? That don't actually get loot. So you have master loot, you have 30 players in a raid, and only 5 of these 30 players are actually characters that get loot, right? So you kill a boss, and all of the loot that is in that boss can be given to those 5 players instead of having to distribute it to 30 players, right? That is how a split raid works, because that's how you maximize the loot that you can get on your main characters that you're going to be using for the mythic raid later on. Master loot made this incredibly strong, right? Because you specifically managed to give all of those items to those set players, right? And I do think that personal loot was like a decision of Blizzard to implement to basically lower the amount of advantage these guilds are getting from doing those split raids. Now, people are saying that, oh, well, this change didn't do anything. The top guilds are still split raiding, and so what does this change actually do with removing master loot? And it is true that the top guilds are still split raiding. The thing, though, is that the top guilds that are split raiding, the advantage that they're getting from it is definitely lower than what it used to be when there was master loot, right? Because the way personal loot works is that every person in the raid can get an item, and you can only trade that item if you already have a same item level piece or higher. So you cannot invite any alt character into your raid. You can't just invite a character that is 20 item levels lower than what you're supposed to be, because then they won't be able to trade anything if they get something, right? So especially when a new tier comes out and when the item level gets increased, then usually there's not many characters that can actually trade heroic loot, right? Because heroic loot is the highest item level loot you can get when heroic opens up. So that means that the amount of advantage, the amount of extra loot you can get through split raiding has definitely diminished with personal loot. And I think that was their goal. And by they, I mean Blizzard. They were thinking, okay, so how do we remove split rating? Because surely split rating has become a big problem for years, right? And I do think that Blizzard was thinking, so what can we do? How can we make split rating not worth it? How can we like remove it completely from the game? Because I don't think anyone likes split rating. Not the top guilds don't like it. No one likes it. And I also don't think that Blizzard likes it either, because it's just this unfun thing that people are doing to get an advantage, and it's causing issues for everyone, right? So they tried to remove it, in my opinion, but weren't able to come up with an actual solution to completely remove it. I don't think there's very many ways to completely remove split rating from the game, because there's always going to be something that they can do to split rate anyway. Like, for example, when people are saying, you can just have an ID that is on all of your characters. So let's say, if you rate on your druid, then your warrior also gets an ID, right? First of all, that would be really annoying for everyone, because that would also affect everyone else. But additionally, what that would mean is that these top players, they're just going to make multiple accounts then, right? So instead of having one account, they'll just have 6 accounts, right? And then they're still going to be split rating. So there's always something these top guilds can do to like circumvent these kind of rules that Blizzard can implement. So in my opinion, what Blizzard was thinking is like, okay, so we cannot stop split rating. So what are we going to do to diminish the amount of advantage these top guilds are getting from doing these split rates? And that's why they implemented personal loot, in my opinion. Again, I'm just theorizing. I don't know this for sure, but it is very obvious that master loot gives you a bigger advantage versus personal loot whenever you do split rating, right? That is also why a lot of guilds actually stopped split rating or reduced the amount of split ratings that they were doing, right? Because if you're like a top 50 guild or something, maybe you did 4 split rates in the past because it was such a big advantage that you got from doing these split rates with master loot. But now with personal loot, it's not as big of an advantage anymore. So they decided to cut it back to maybe only do 2 split rates, or maybe not at all, right? And the top guilds are still doing the same amount of split rates, right? If not worse than before. But the advantage that they're getting is definitely lower, right? They definitely do not get as big of a power spike increase compared to other guilds as they used to with Master Loot. And now you might be asking yourself, but why do you need to stop? Like, why is this important? Like, why does it matter that the top 0.1% have such a big power increase? Just give it to them. Like, why does it matter, right? And the answer is that how are you going to tune the bosses if the top 0.1% does X amount of extra damage compared to everyone else, right? If you take a look at this, right? So let's assume that this is like DPS, yeah? And I'm talking about rate DPS. So the DPS of the full rate. And this is time. This is like, yeah, time. So let's say a patch comes out and these are like the top 1% guilds. Like everyone starts at the same DPS, right? Let's say this is, the green is World First guilds, blue is like top 50 or something, and this purple is like here. Now they all start at the same number usually. I just put them underneath to see the difference, right? So let's start with the World First guilds, right? They do the first couple of raids. Let's assume this is Master Loot, okay? They will get a power spike really early on. And then they probably, kill the boss like here, the last boss. I mean, they clear it right here. Now the problem is that that all the other guilds usually don't get as big of a power spike at the start. Like they maybe stay here. This is like a top 50 guild, right? A top 50 guild is also going to do split rates, but not as many as the top guilds. So their DPS is going to be a lot lower than them, at least at the start. Later on, they're going to meet them here, of course. But early on, they're going to be lower. Then any guild that doesn't do any split rates whatsoever, they are going to stay even further below, right? They're going to stay here, and then eventually they're going to go up and meet the same damage. But at the start, when they kill the last boss, then the DPS of like a normal quote-unquote guild is still going to be down here. And that is a problem because of specifically boss tuning, right? Because how do you tune a boss, if the world first guilds are doing this amount of damage here, but a normal quote-unquote guild does this amount of damage, right? Like, how are you going to tune this boss properly? Because we all want the world first race to be close and interesting, right? The world first race has been around for so long, and people love following it, right? If they tune the raid around this kind of DPS number, then the bosses are going to be somewhat unkillable for the DPS that is down here. And then some people are saying, oh, but you can just only tune the last bosses so hard, and the earlier bosses are fine, that are tuned lower, right? Because the guild that is down here, they probably doesn't even reach the last boss until they are here, right? And that is true. It is true, right? But everyone kind of wants a tuning curve to be not going like this, right? And I do think that is why the tuning was so off in Legion. You know, Legion had Master Loot and tier stats. And Legion was definitely a expansion where split rating has kind of gotten out of control, right? And I do think there were a lot of bosses in Legion that had some tuning issues. A lot of raids were like, oh, super easy boss, right? Every boss was like super easy. And then like, bam, like the last two bosses were like much harder than everything else. And I think that is the direct result of Master Loot plus tier sets that arised. And people are saying, oh, well, but we already had Master Loot and tier sets in the past, even before Legion. And yes, that is true. The thing though is that the top guilds weren't as big of a problem back then, because of course in any kind of video game and in any sport, the longer a sport exists, the longer a video game exists, the gap between the best players and average players just widens, right? Because the best become better. And of course, the average player also becomes better, but not to such a fast pace as the best players, right? And I do think that in Legion, it was very noticeable that the top guilds did have such a gear advantage after those split raids. Not only a gear advantage, but also they became better as players as well and as guilds. And therefore, it became a problem with tuning. And I do think that Blizzard looked at this problem and they were saying, okay, we have to diminish this gap, right? I think they were thinking, okay, so this is a problem, right? The difference between like the damage here and the damage here, this is a problem because we cannot tune bosses properly. If we tune the bosses for like this number here, like this, then the world first guilds are just going to run through the raid and kill every boss, and it's going to be boring and everyone's going to hate it, right? But if they tune it for this number here, then yeah, it's going to be a challenge for them, but everyone else feels like they are playing a different game because they're doing nowhere near the numbers of these high-end players, right? Because of the missing gear advantage that they're getting from those split raids. So what did they do? They introduced personal loot as a mandatory thing. Now, a lot of people obviously know that the top guilds are still split raiding, right? So the top guilds are still getting an advantage when it comes to loot at the very start of a tier. But this time around, I would say that the advantage that they get is actually quite a bit lower, right? Because personal loot, because of all the things that I explained earlier, right? So I do think that, yeah, even if they get a lot more gear earlier, the difference here is probably smaller, right? And that is manageable. Like the smaller difference between the DPS is more manageable for Blizzard to actually tune the bosses, and therefore it has been okay. Now, the problem though is, sorry that I explained this for so long, but I felt like I have to like visualize this for it to make sense. The problem that now arises with 9.2 is that we have these tier tokens, this tier set, that if they have the tier tokens be tradable normally, like normal personal loot works, then the top guilds are gonna have this tier set almost immediately, right? Like they're gonna be able to trade themselves this tier so quickly that almost all of their players are gonna force that in the first mythic week already, while most other guilds will not, right? And the force set is so powerful in like a damage increase that we will have the same issue again that I just showed, where the top players' raid DPS is gonna be a lot higher than everyone else's raid DPS. And that is gonna create the same tuning problem again that we had before. So what they're, in my opinion, now trying to do is that they basically try to not have it be tradable. So those top guilds cannot trade this tier set back and forth as they please, to be able to diminish the advantage they are getting from these split rates, to be able to tune the bosses better. And I do think that is their thinking. I personally don't like the implementation of this. Like, I don't think that this is good, because it actually affects a lot of players, that the tokens are not tradable unless you already have a piece, unless they add some certain conditions. I do think this can work, not make the tokens tradable, if you're able to actually add certain conditions. So let's say, for example, a player already has 4 set, but you don't have the shoulders, okay? And then the shoulders drop. With their system in mind, you wouldn't be able to trade the shoulders, right? Because you don't already have that tier piece. But if there would be a condition that says, hey, if you get a token, but you already have 4 piece, then you're gonna be able to trade it. That would be good, right? I think that would be a good solution. Now, the reality is, I don't think they can code it that way, honestly. We have never had anything like that before. We have never had any sort of conditions to gear trading other than the item level. So I'm not sure if there's even a possibility to do that. But yeah, that is definitely going to be an issue for everyone, right? It's going to be an issue that you're gonna do a raid, and there's a player who got really lucky, he's already got 4 set, and then another person has 3 set, and the person with 4 set loots the shoulders and can't trade the shoulders, right? And that is going to be a little bit of a problem for everyone, not just for the well-first guilds or for like the top 0.1%, right? So I do think this not tradable thing can cause issues for everyone a little bit. The problem is, I honestly don't know how to resolve this issue. Like, I don't really know any good idea to fix this problem. I honestly don't know. I don't think there's any like really good way to do this, other than saying, hey guys, everyone gets 4 set plus legendary already from the get-go, which obviously is not how World of Warcraft works, or any MMO works for that matter. So that wouldn't be like a real solution. And other than that, I don't really know. Like, how do you make it so the top 0.1% don't get their 4 set immediately compared to everyone else not having it? Because then it creates this power difference that creates tuning problems, right? How do you make it so that doesn't happen, but at the same time you also don't make it like annoying for everyone else at the same time, right? I don't know. What do you think? Do you think there's any sort of solution for this problem? Do you think it's not a problem at all? Do you think whatever, if the top guilds are doing this, it doesn't matter? What do you think? Because I do know that the top guilds are very annoyed about this, because what's going to happen, or what they're going to do now, is that they're just going to create 6 characters of the same spec. So let's say there's one player has 6 Moonkins, and the other player has 6 Mages, and one has 6 Warlocks. And the reason why they're going to be doing this is they just clear Heroic with all of these characters, and they're just going to choose to play the character that got the most tier, right? So if I have 6 Moonkins, one Moonkin gets 0 tier, one gets 1, one gets 2, and one gets 3, then I'm going to play the character that has 3 of the tier pieces, right? So obviously they're still going to get an advantage from doing that in a very, very annoying way. But they're still getting an advantage, not as much as they would if it would be completely tradable, right? So yeah, what do you think? I honestly think that this is such a big problem nowadays with the top guilds versus normal guilds, quote unquote, that I almost feel like that it's almost impossible to solve this problem, especially early on in a progression. I know this is like a very drastic solution, but I do think that the very best thing that we could maybe do is add another difficulty, like ultimates in Final Fantasy XIV, where you basically say, hey guys, this difficulty doesn't give you any loot. So Mythic would still be a difficulty, right? So you still have Mythic raids that are like tuned for somewhat normal players, right? And it should still be difficult, of course, but it shouldn't be tuned for like, well-versed guilds. And then you have like an extra difficulty that is like scaled difficulty. So everyone that enters the raid gets scaled to a certain item level, right? And additionally, this difficulty doesn't award any sort of loot, right? Because then it creates a scenario where that is going to be the hardest difficulty, and these guilds want to do that hardest difficulty, But the problem with the loot is not going to be such a big deal because they're scaling anyway. And then at the same time, they still want to do Mythic because it's still a hard difficulty that people want to do. And yeah, I don't know. What do you think about this? I just think that the difference between the top guilds and like the normal guilds has widened so much. Like it's such a big gap between those guilds when it comes to commitment and skill and like everything, that it's so hard and almost impossible to properly even balance this without it being like a complete mess for someone, right? Either it's going to be a complete mess for the well-versed guilds where they have to do this really like weird split rates with 6 characters of the same class, or it's going to be a problem for everyone else if they implement any sort of rules to diminish their advantage, right? Like the thing with the personal loot, everyone kind of got affected with this personal loot forcing, right? Even though it was only an issue because of those like top end guilds. And so yeah, what are we gonna do about this? I'm not sure. I don't have any solutions, at least not any like easy solutions. If you know anything or you have a idea, then definitely let me know in the comments below. And that's it. Sorry for the long rant video, but I did think I should just put out my thoughts and tell you what I think about this. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!